somebody calls themselves gay or lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer, or they call themselves a homosexual, as Reagan seems to like, it's a very personal thing. So for one person it may be one thing, and for another person it may be another. I guess in general, somebody... See, I don't even want to say it, because there's no in general. Everyone's identity is unique to themselves. It's just a matter of the words that they're using to describe what that thing inside them is. So a lot of times what I may say is why I call myself queer is the same reason why somebody else may call themselves a lesbian or gay. It's not contradictory because people are different, I guess. If that makes any sense. That's my non-answer.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to disagree with Chris at all. I mean, it is very personal, and I mean, when he's talking about sexuality, he's talking about the act of sex of another person or persons, and but there are sort of working clinical definitions, there are working legal definitions, which have a real import, right? How each state defines sexuality is really important, and it's based in many of the clinical definitions, and it's based in many legal definitions on the sex, the biological sex of the body you are interacting with, right? Now, in some states, that you can't change it, so. Whereas in some states they will recognize that you can change your sex legally. Even though your biology is changing, you can go through sex change operation and transition, and I can go from being male to being female, and the state will recognize me, and therefore my sexuality can therefore change by legal and clinical definition. Some states you can't. My chromosomes don't stay the same, and so even though I've gone through transition, I'm now female, that state will still consider me male, so it just complicates really this question of sexuality. But he has a working definition that many have, and it is about the desire of another body, right? Now, sexuality is more than about sex. Sexuality is a mode of communication through which we can express a great many of things to another person or persons. And it has to do with how we talk, it has to do with how we act, our body language, how we dress, and can include the act of sex. And so, while we have these categories, if they're based on the sex of the body in which we're desiring to communicate, you can communicate love, you can communicate gratitude, affection, or frustration, or anger, any of these things, right? Through how we talk to them, how we sort of understand our body language, or through the act of sex. So because the clinics and because the legal is based on the sex bodies, we recognize 2 sex bodies, so we're quite limited in the number of terms of sexuality. You're homosexual, you're heterosexual, or bisexual. And again, I think that many people recognize that it's much more fluid, right? And I think that even though he is operating in this very binaristic system, we see through his actions that it is very, very fluid. And so I think, again, I know I said this, but I think that tension is a really important thing to talk
about. So this is not a typical coming out story, right? So he's under this great military pressure, really oppressive environments that openly hostile towards women in particular. And then this is also a 5-year-old book. 5 years is sort of an eon in gay rights terms, and our students will be about 12 or 13 when the book came out. So what's changed about coming out, the experience of coming out? What's different for a student coming out in college now? Where are there similarities? And what do students need from administrators, instructors, PTAs, and parents? I think what's different for students that are coming out now or coming up from high school is that a lot of students, maybe a lot of students,
are more likely to have gone to a high school with a Gay Straight Alliance. They're coming to Stony Brook, where a safe space program exists, which didn't 5 years ago. They're coming to a university where there is a very active LGBTA. So in 5 years, things like that change. I know when I was coming in, LGBTA was about 10, 15 people meeting once a week, and now it's between 50 and 100 people that meet at least twice a week, if not more. And they're a pretty visible group on campus. I think that the existence of things is what's different. Students before had to build those things. Coming into college meant there's no group for me, maybe I'll go and start one. And then it's, collecting people and collecting resources to have this group. Whereas the students that are coming up now are used to having it there already. I think the things that we can offer them as instructors, as just folks representing the university, is an open mind and just sort of the use of language that is inclusive of people's identities, and trying not to make assumptions about people based on their experiences or identities.
Two ideas. One is that although I think the movement toward gay rights in this country has proceeded at a pace that's unprecedented, that in like 30 years shift from almost total darkness to at least almost total legal, but I won't even go that far. But it's changed a lot. It's changed a lot faster than it has for women and a lot faster than it has on race issues. But at the same time, probably the most common critical adjective that you could use in high school is gay, right? That's so gay. And almost no one is bothered by that, it seems, in the general culture. So even though there's been a lot of progress, it seems to me that it's still a huge uphill battle. From the point of view of what we can do as teachers, it seems to me that this book in a way puts us all on the spot as teachers. Even if we can share hesitations or uncertainties or whatever, that won't fly in a class where you're supposed to be talking about this book. And so it'll make you speed ahead, and we speed ahead faster than we might have. I don't mean that should mean that we should go overboard in the sense of just saying this is a great book and tell us all how it should behave. It should still be very much of a discussable book, but it does put quite a challenge on the teacher.
And he mentioned it fairly early in the book where he was guilty of this himself. He would say, oh, that's okay, it could be sort of condescending or insulting. And again, he doesn't do a whole lot with it. He says, there's something messed up about that. But I think for most of your students, they're going to be familiar with this, and it is, again, one of those things that people can talk about. But in terms of resources, I mean, Chris is exactly right. Things have changed quite a bit on this campus, and we have many more resources for students than we ever did, and the safe space which she directs, and she has cards to hand out, and so they should know that there are these resources available on campus, from the CPO to the Women's and Gender Resource Center to the safe space signs that are on doors where they can go in, and all these things. Those are really important.
Well, just one practical thing, and one positive thing that I think could come out of the fact that we have chosen this as our required first year reading, and especially out of the fact that the author will be coming to campus. And I have seen him in TV. He comes across to me much better when he speaks than when he writes. I think one positive thing will be that such could be that such tragedies as the one of Tyler Clementi in Rutgers last year, or last semester, was it fall or was it spring? Fall. May actually not be likely here. In a year in which the main speaker for freshmen is actually an active representative of the gay community. And I think it may not be bad if you consider at the beginning of the semester or at the beginning of the discussion of this book, refreshing our freshmen's otherwise pretty short memory, in case they even read the newspaper or anything, about the Tyler Clementi story, which is very standard. It could have happened anywhere, doesn't have to happen in Rutgers. Unfortunately, it happened in Stony Brook, etc. The bullying is not going to stop with or without Rice and Lynn Cole on campus. What may stop is the reaction of the victims of the bullying. I could imagine Tyler Clementi having had to read and discuss this and having had this guy on campus, you know, maybe with dinner and everything else introduced by the provost and so on. So I can imagine him answering, "Oh, you took a video of me with my boyfriend in my..." So what? F you. That would have been a much better outcome, I have to say, than the outcome that unfortunately took place.
And unfortunately, I learned that thing. So I think one of the interesting things about this book is that we're teaching is that, you know, he's having to deal with this in a system and structure in which there are no resources for him, right? And we see the devastating effects on him and others in the group, other gay lesbian cadets, and the things they have to go through physically and emotionally because there are no resources. And so I think it's, you know, we make them aware of the resources we have here, but we talk about, you know, what are the effects, what are the consequences of not having it? In what ways do you benefit from having these kinds of outlets?
So let's talk a little bit about, Lynn Cole is very candid about his sexual experiences and his journey of self-discovery. I mean, some of the scenes are rather raw and long and explicit. So what is this about? Is this just sensationalism? Is this significant? How can we help students understand such passages in the law? And some of us have taught material that is liberal. And how do you deal with that in the classroom? Have a conversation about something like that.
I take the microphone first because I think we have to do this a lot in literature classes. And maybe get the opportunity to do it. My feeling is, I am made uncomfortable by a lot of this stuff myself. And yeah, if it's an honest experience, which I think this is, I think it's good for people to be aware of it. Number one, your students, most of them, will have been familiar with many things worse or more explicit or more extended or more something. Okay? However, some of them will have had very little experience, and that's one of the challenges as a teacher, is dealing with students who have very little experience with sexually explicit material. And I'll help you with that on the side. The overall point I would like to make is that I think it's good to discuss issues of sexuality in a university setting, in classes. Because I think most of the discussions that students go through are in a much less respectable setting. And with people who are looking at less of the big picture. And just to have a discussion, even if it doesn't lead to any conclusion, these issues in an open, ethical way, or hoping to come to an ethical conclusion about it, I think is a good experience for most students. So my experience over 35 years of teaching literature that has sexually explicit material in it is that it winds up being a good experience for almost everyone.